It happened on a Thursday afternoon, 3:15 exactly. I remember because I'd been watching the clock, waiting for my annual performance review with director Alan Kovacs. The late October sun was streaming through my window at that sharp angle that meant winter was coming. 11 years at Resilience Technologies, and these meetings had become routine, pleasant even. I'd gotten commendations the last 3 years running. My desk had a small collection of excellence awards gathering dust behind my monitor, next to the framed photo of Steve and me at the Grand Canyon and a coffee mug that said "Data never lies." But when I walked into his office that Thursday, Diane Fletcher was already sitting there. She was 26, maybe 27, wearing a navy blazer that still had the price tag creases. She'd been with the company 18 months, hired right out of her master's program. Alan didn't waste time with pleasantries. No offer to sit. No small talk about the weather or the weekend or the new coffee machine they'd installed in the break room. "Nancy, we're making some structural changes. Diane will be taking over the quarterly compliance reporting moving forward. Effective immediately." I stood there, folder in hand containing my self-evaluation and goal sheets for the coming year, trying to process what I'd just heard. My fingers were numb. The quarterly reports had been mine since the division formed. I'd built the entire framework from scratch when they spun off Resilience Technologies from the parent company back in 2014, created every template, established relationships with every department head we pulled data from. I'd presented to the board 4 times a year for nearly a decade, standing at the front of that walnut-paneled conference room with the terrible projector that always needed adjusting. "I don't understand," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice level. "Is there a problem with my work?" He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled. That smirk was already forming at the corners of his mouth. "She's more reliable than you. Fresh perspective, better attention to detail. We need someone who can handle the pressure of high-stakes deliverables." Diane wouldn't meet my eyes. She stared at her hands folded in her lap, cheeks flushed pink. I said nothing. What could I say? That I'd never missed a deadline in 11 years? That the board had complimented my presentations multiple times? That the CFO himself had sent me a thank you email last quarter calling my analysis indispensable? I walked out, went back to my desk, and sat there as the office emptied around me. The sun set. The security lights flickered on in the parking lot below. The cleaning crew came through, and Maria, who'd cleaned my office for 6 years, asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me. I stayed until almost 8, staring at my screen, not really seeing anything, just watching the cursor blink. 11 years. I was 6 months from full vesting in the executive retirement package, the enhanced one they'd introduced 5 years ago that required 12 years to unlock. The timing felt surgical. Precise. Like someone had looked at a calendar and marked an X with a red pen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan going around and around, listening to my husband Steve's steady breathing beside me. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:47 a.m., then 3:12, then 4:03. I kept replaying the meeting, the casual cruelty of it. The way Alan had smiled when he said reliable. Like he was enjoying himself. Like he'd practiced the line in the mirror. But more than that, something nagged at me. A technical concern beneath the emotional wound, itching at the back of my mind. The reports weren't just files you handed off. They were ecosystems, dozens of interdependent data sources, custom macros I'd written in Visual Basic over the years, relationships with people who'd only ever worked with me. The finance department sent their data in one format. Operations in another. Compliance used a third-party system that required special access credentials and a manual download process because the APIs were unreliable. I'd learned all these rhythms through years of trial and error. Friday morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick. Not because I was physically ill, but because I couldn't face going in and pretending everything was fine, couldn't smile in the hallway and act like my world hadn't just shifted. Instead, I went through my files methodically, every document related to the quarterly reports that I'd saved to my personal network drive over the years. I made coffee. I put on comfortable clothes. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table where the morning light was good, and I started digging. Not to sabotage anything, I'm not built that way, but to understand what I'd actually created over the past decade. It was worse than I thought. Or better, depending on how you looked at it. The reporting system wasn't documented anywhere except in my personal notes, scattered across different files and formats. The data feeds came from 7 different departments, each with their own quirks and schedules I'd learned to navigate. Finance closed their books on the 3rd Friday of each quarter, but sometimes they'd revise on Monday if they found discrepancies. Operations reported weekly, but their numbers were preliminary until the final week of the quarter. Compliance had to be pulled manually on the last day, after 5 p.m., because their system didn't timestamp correctly before then. The master template had over 200 formulas, many of them nested conditionals I'd built to handle exceptions that occurred once or twice a year. What happened when a department reorganized mid-quarter? When an acquisition added new product lines? When regulatory changes required different categorizations? I'd built solutions for all of it, little pieces of logic that kept the machine running smoothly. The validation protocols required knowing which department heads to call when numbers looked off, and why. If finance reported revenue growth but operations showed declining shipment volumes, that meant the sales team was recognizing future contracts early. Call the VP of sales first, not finance, because he could explain the contract terms. If compliance showed increased violations but audit showed decreased findings, that meant they'd changed their classification system. Call compliance and get the mapping document. I'd built something comprehensive and functional, but I'd built it for myself. For someone who knew the history, who understood the context, who had the relationships. Saturday afternoon, my phone rang. Claudia Way, an attorney I'd known since college. We'd stayed close, meeting for coffee every few weeks, celebrating each other's birthdays, attending each other's kids' graduations. She'd been maid of honor at my wedding. I'd helped her move into her first apartment after law school. "You sound strange," she said when I answered. Her voice was concerned. "What's wrong? You didn't show up for coffee yesterday." I'd completely forgotten. I told her everything. The meeting, the timing, the smirk, the sick feeling in my stomach that this was somehow planned, orchestrated. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her thinking, the way she used to in law school when she was working through a problem. "Nancy, do you have an employment contract?" "Of course. Everyone at director level and above does." "When did you sign it?" I had to think. "About 7 years ago, when they promoted me to senior analyst. They updated all the contracts that year, brought in some outside firm to standardize everything." "Do you have a copy?" I did. It was in a file cabinet in my home office, in a folder labeled Important Documents that I hadn't opened in years. I pulled it up while she waited on the line. 14 pages of dense legal language, the kind of document you sign because you have to, not because you understand every clause. "Read me the section about intellectual property," Claudia said. Her voice had changed. Sharper now, focused. I found it on page 7 and started reading aloud. The language was dense, full of heretofore and notwithstanding and pursuant to, but the core was clear. Any systems, processes, or methodologies I developed as part of my employment belonged to the company. Standard stuff. But then there was a second paragraph, and this was the part that made my hands start shaking as I read it. The company acknowledges that employee may develop specialized knowledge, systems, or methodologies in the course of their employment. In the event of role reassignment, termination, or transfer of such responsibilities, the company agrees to provide reasonable time and resources for proper documentation and knowledge transfer, or to retain employee in a consulting capacity to ensure continuity. "They can't just take your work and shut you out," Claudia said. "Not without proper knowledge transfer. That's breach of contract." "And Nancy? If they're doing this 6 months before your vesting, that's potentially constructive termination designed to make you quit before you get your full benefits." "What does that mean legally?" "It means if they're deliberately making your position untenable to force you out before you vest, that's actionable. Keep a record of everything. Don't delete any emails, don't throw away any documents. Save every text message. And Nancy? Don't help them fix whatever's about to break. Let it break. Let them realize what they've lost." I barely slept that weekend. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Alan smirk. But I also saw something else, spreadsheets full of broken formulas, data that didn't reconcile, executives standing before the board with nothing to present. Monday morning, I came in early. 6 a.m., before anyone else arrived. The parking lot was empty except for the overnight security guard's car. My access hadn't been revoked, they'd just reassigned the work. I pulled up the shared drive where the quarterly report templates lived, the ones Diane would need. The folder was still there, still accessible. I didn't touch anything. I just looked, scrolling through slowly, taking mental notes. She'd already made changes. Small ones, but each revealed how much she didn't understand about how the system worked. She'd reformatted cells that contained formulas, breaking the calculations. She'd changed column headers that matched exactly with automated data feeds, so the data would import into the wrong fields. She'd cleaned up my notes, deleting context I'd added about why certain calculations worked the way they did. She'd removed color coding that indicated which cells were manual entry versus formula-driven. The next quarterly deadline was in 3 weeks. The data collection phase had already started. The board presentation was scheduled for the Tuesday after the quarter closed. I went to my desk and worked on other projects. I still had plenty. Standard analyst work, nothing glamorous, but I did it thoroughly and professionally. I answered emails. I updated spreadsheets. I attended the Monday morning staff meeting and took notes. I didn't offer to help. I didn't send warning emails. I didn't stop by Diane's desk to check how things were going. When she passed by in the hallway, I smiled and said good morning in the same tone I always used. Tuesday, my work phone rang. Alan's assistant, a nervous woman named Paula who'd always been kind to me. Nancy? Director Kovacs would like to see you in his office. He was alone this time, shuffling papers on his desk, not looking at me directly. Nancy, Diane has some questions about the reporting templates. Basic stuff, shouldn't take long. I thought you might spend an hour or so walking her through things. I'd be happy to, I said. Should I invoice that as consulting work? Since it's no longer part of my assigned duties? His jaw tightened. A vein pulsed in his temple. You're still an employee here. Of course. But my employment contract specifies that knowledge transfer for reassigned responsibilities should be handled through proper documentation or formal training arrangements. I'd need to review what's being requested to ensure I'm in compliance with company policy. I'd been up until 2 a.m. reading my contract, highlighting sections, cross-referencing with the employee handbook. He dismissed me without another word. Just waved his hand like he was swatting a fly. Wednesday, Claudia called. I did some research on resilience technologies. Want to hear something interesting? Always. 3 years ago, they had a senior analyst named Harold Vance. Worked there 9 years, got pushed out right before he would have hit 10 years and unlocked the enhanced pension. The enhanced package didn't exist when he started, they introduced it after he'd been there 5 years, and it required 10 years from the date of introduction. He left at 9 years and 11 months. My blood went cold. How did you find this? Public records, mostly. LinkedIn profiles, employment litigation databases. He filed a complaint with the state labor board but withdrew it. Settled for something, probably not much. 2 years before that, Stephanie Torres. Same thing, 11 years total service, moved to an untenable position, resigned before full vesting. She was a project manager. Got reassigned to data entry work, took it as constructive termination, walked away. Did they fight it? No. That's the pattern. They take a small settlement, sign an NDA, and disappear. Easier than fighting. Cheaper than lawyer fees. Less risky than gambling on a trial. Nancy, this is intentional. Your company has a strategy. Can you prove it? Not yet. But if we can find the others and they're willing to talk, even informally, we might have something bigger than your individual case. We might have a pattern of systematic pension theft. Thursday morning, Diane appeared at my desk. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, coffee stains on her sleeve. Her hands were shaking slightly when she set down her laptop. Nancy, I'm really struggling with the validation protocols. The numbers from finance aren't reconciling with operations, and I don't understand why. They should match, but they're off by almost 3 million. I've been here until midnight every night this week. I looked at her carefully. She wasn't the enemy, not really. She was just younger, cheaper, and too inexperienced to realize she was being used. She probably thought this was a great opportunity, a chance to prove herself. The operations data comes in on a fiscal calendar, but finance uses standard calendar quarters. There's a conversion table in my old notes, the ones that were in the template before they were deleted. You'll need to rebuild it. The fiscal year boundaries shift based on when the company was incorporated, so it's not a simple 90-day offset. She paled. That's going to take days. Maybe weeks. How do I even start? You'd need to go back through historical data, figure out the pattern, validate it against old reports. I built the original table over the course of about 3 months, checking it against every quarter for 2 years to make sure it was accurate. Can't you just? I don't work on those reports anymore, Diane. Director Kovacs was very clear about that. You're more reliable than I am, remember? Fresh perspective. Better attention to detail. She walked away. I felt bad for about 30 seconds. Then I remembered the smirk and got back to work. Friday afternoon, my work phone started ringing. Alan's cell. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I silenced it and put the phone in my desk drawer, under a stack of old reports. The email came at 4:30, urgent, need to discuss quarterly reporting issues. My office. Now. I didn't go. I finished the analysis I was working on, saved my files, shut down my computer properly like I always did, and left at 5, exactly on time. I walked past his office. The door was open. He was on the phone, pacing, gesturing angrily. My personal phone buzzed as I was driving home. A text from Alan's number, "This is unprofessional." I didn't respond. I turned on the radio instead. Classical music. Something calming. My hands were steady on the wheel. Saturday, Claudia and I met at her office downtown. She'd taken over a corner office at a mid-sized firm 3 years ago, all glass walls and expensive furniture, the kind of space that said you'd made it. She spread printouts across her mahogany desk, employment records, LinkedIn screenshots, news articles, corporate filings, each page marked with colorful sticky notes. I found 2 more, she said, pointing. Kenneth Morrison, wait, you know him? Ken? He left about 4 years ago. He was a great analyst, taught me half of what I know about data validation. He said he was retiring early. Pushed out at year 9. And before him, Lillian Cross. She made it to 11.5 years before they restructured her entire department out from under her. Moved everyone to a new division except her, gave her a choice between relocating to a different state or taking severance. I stared at the timeline she'd drawn on her whiteboard. 5 people over 6 years, all within months of full vesting. All quiet departures, no lawsuits, no press coverage, no fuss. Just gone. They're gambling that people won't fight, Claudia said. That they'll take the hint and leave quietly, or that they won't figure out the pattern. Most people don't. They're embarrassed, they're hurt, they just want to move on. But Nancy, you have something they didn't. Your work is breaking right now, in real time, and they desperately need you. We can use that. What do you want me to do? She smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile she used to get in mock trial competitions before she destroyed the opposing argument. Nothing. Do absolutely nothing. Let it break. Let them panic. Let them realize they can't fix this without you. And when they come to you desperate, when they're up against the wall with the board presentation looming, we make demands. Monday morning, I arrived at 8 to chaos. Diane was crying in the break room, surrounded by crumpled tissues and an empty box of tea bags. Alan's door was closed, but I could hear him on the phone through the wall, voice raised, words like unacceptable and liability carrying clearly. The quarterly board presentation was in 10 days. Someone had left a half-eaten bagel on the conference table. The coffee in the pot was cold. My work phone had 23 missed calls from Friday evening through Sunday night. 17 voicemails. I deleted them without listening. At 9 a.m., I got an email from Catherine Reeves, the VP of Operations. Can we talk? This morning if possible. Her office, not mine. Catherine had always been fair to me. She'd been one of the executives who'd sent compliments about my presentations. She had a photo of her daughter's college graduation on her desk and always remembered to ask about Steve. I went to her office on the 4th floor, took the stairs instead of the elevator, giving myself time to think. Nancy, I'll be direct. The quarterly report is a disaster. The data doesn't make sense, the validation is failing, nothing reconciles. We present to the board a week from Wednesday and we have nothing to show them. Alan says you're refusing to help. That's not accurate. I offered to provide consulting services with proper documentation, as specified in my employment contract for knowledge transfer of reassigned responsibilities. Director Kovacs declined. She studied me for a long moment. You've been here a long time. This isn't like you. You've always been a team player. What's not like me is being told I'm unreliable and having 11 years of work stripped away 6 months before my vesting completes. That's not like this company either. Or it didn't used to be. Catherine's expression shifted slightly. Something clicked behind her eyes. 6 months before vesting. Yes. I need to make some calls. Don't go anywhere. Tuesday, Claudia sent a formal letter to Resilience Technologies' legal department. It outlined the breach of contract regarding knowledge transfer. It noted the suspicious timing relative to vesting schedules. It mentioned that we'd identified a pattern of similar situations with former employees and that we were in contact with several of them. It did not threaten a lawsuit. It simply requested a meeting to discuss resolution. The response came within 4 hours. Wednesday morning, I got called to HR. Not Alan's office, HR. The Director of Human Resources, Paul Hendricks, was there. He had reading glasses perched on his nose and worry lines around his eyes. So was a woman I didn't recognize, who introduced herself as outside counsel from a firm downtown, Madison and Associates. Different from the company's usual counsel. She had a leather portfolio and a Mont Blanc pen. Ms. Moses, we'd like to resolve this situation amicably. I'd like that too. We're prepared to reinstate you to the quarterly reporting responsibilities and provide a formal apology from Director Kovacs for any miscommunication. I said nothing. Claudia had coached me, let them make offers, don't negotiate with yourself, don't fill silence with agreement. The lawyer shifted in her seat. We'd also accelerate your vesting schedule. Full benefits, effective immediately. You'd be fully vested as of today. And the others? Paul frowned. I'm sorry? Harold Vance. Stephanie Torres. Kenneth Morrison. Lillian Cross. The other employees who left right before vesting under similar circumstances. The room went very quiet. The lawyer's pen stopped moving across her legal pad. We'd need to include a confidentiality agreement, the lawyer said carefully. Standard practice in settlements. No. Excuse me? I won't sign anything that prevents me from discussing my employment experience. And any resolution needs to include policy changes to prevent this from happening to anyone else going forward. The lawyer looked at Paul. Paul looked at his hands. The lawyer's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then excused herself to take a call in the hallway. When she came back, her expression had changed. We'll need to discuss this with senior leadership. Thursday, Claudia got a call from their outside counsel. They wanted to meet, all parties, with their full legal team present. Friday afternoon at 3. They're scared, Claudia said when she called to update me. The pattern documentation spooked them. If this goes public, if the other victims join a class action, if employment lawyers start looking at their records, they're looking at serious liability. Not just financial, reputational. This is the kind of thing that ends up in business journals. What do we ask for? Everything. And we don't back down. Friday afternoon, we met in a conference room at Resilience Technologies headquarters. The big one on the executive floor with the view of the city. Their side had 4 lawyers and 2 executives I'd never met, people from corporate, above Alan's level, wearing suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage. Our side was me, Claudia, and a thick folder of documentation that made a satisfying thud when she set it on the polished table. They opened with a comprehensive offer, full vesting immediately, a retention bonus equivalent to 6 months' salary, reinstatement to my role with a written guarantee of no retaliation, and a confidentiality agreement with a substantial financial incentive for signing. Claudia barely glanced at the paper they slid across the table. Ms. Moses accepts the vesting and retention terms, but she requires several additional conditions. First, no confidentiality clause of any kind. She retains the right to discuss her employment experience freely. Second, a formal written policy change prohibiting the practice of reassigning or restructuring employees approaching vesting milestones without documented performance issues and formal review. Third, an independent review of all employees who left the company within 6 months of major vesting milestones in the past 5 years, with an offer to make them whole. Fourth, Director Kovacs is removed from any supervisory authority over Ms. Moses and receives formal management training on employment law compliance. One of the executives, an older man with silver hair and an expensive suit, leaned forward. "That's excessive. We're offering a generous settlement." "That's accountability," Claudia said calmly. "Your company has a documented pattern of systematic pension theft. Ms. Moses could take this public tomorrow. She could contact every business journalist who covers corporate ethics. She could reach out to the other victims and organize them into a coordinated legal action. She could file complaints with the State Labor Board, the EEOC, and industry regulators. Or you can fix this quietly, make it right, and prevent it from happening again." They asked for a recess. We waited in the conference room for 40 minutes. Someone brought water in glass bottles with the company logo. I didn't drink it. Claudia checked her phone. I stared out the window at the city below, watching tiny cars move through intersections. When they came back, the silver-haired executive spoke. "We'll agree to your terms with one modification. The independent review will be conducted by an external firm, and we'll reach out to former employees. But any remediation offers will be handled case by case with individual confidentiality agreements for those specific resolutions." Claudia looked at me. I nodded. "Acceptable," she said. They drew up the paperwork that afternoon. 9 pages of legal agreement. I read every word before signing. So did Claudia. We negotiated 3 additional clauses on the spot, including one that specified the timeline for the policy changes and another that guaranteed my reporting relationship would change. The following Monday, I returned to my regular duties. The quarterly report was due in 4 days. I worked 16-hour days, rebuilt what had broken, fixed what Diane had misconfigured, and delivered the presentation to the board on Tuesday morning. I wore my best suit, the charcoal gray one I saved for important meetings. My hands didn't shake when I advanced the slides. The CEO thanked me personally afterward. "Nancy, this was exceptional work." As always. Diane was reassigned to a different project, one actually suited to her skill level. She sent me an email apologizing. I wrote back kindly. It wasn't her fault. Alan Kovacs was there, but he didn't speak to me. Didn't make eye contact in meetings. 2 months later, he announced his resignation to pursue other opportunities. I heard through the office grapevine that he'd been quietly pushed out. The company was cleaning house. The following quarter, I documented everything properly this time. Complete training materials, step-by-step guides, video tutorials, detailed notes about every quirk and exception. I trained 2 people as backups, walked them through multiple cycles, made sure they understood not just the how but the why. Catherine Reeves personally called each of the former employees we'd identified. I don't know what all of them decided, those conversations were confidential, but Ken Morrison came back as a consultant for 6 months to finish his vesting. Lillian Cross accepted a financial settlement. Harold Vance declined to participate, but the company sent him a check anyway. I kept working at Resilience Technologies for another 3 years. The work environment improved. New policies went into effect. The company hired an employee advocate position to handle concerns about fair treatment. My relationship with Catherine grew stronger, and she eventually promoted me to director level. When I finally did leave, it was on my terms, with full benefits, a generous retirement package, and 3 people fully trained to take over my responsibilities. I left on a Friday, had a nice retirement party, and started consulting the following Monday. I still have the email from Alan, the one where he told me Diane was more reliable. I keep it in a folder on my personal laptop labeled receipts. Some nights, when I'm feeling petty, I open it and reread that line, "She's more reliable than you." Then I look at my retirement account balance and smile. The system broke because they thought institutional knowledge was disposable. They thought loyalty was weakness and experience was overhead to be eliminated. They thought they could extract value and discard the people who created it. They learned, eventually, that some things can't be replicated without respect. I didn't burn the bridge. I just stopped maintaining it. And when it collapsed under their weight, I stood on the other side and watched them realize what they'd lost. Sometimes the best revenge is just being right. And sometimes it's being right with lawyers, documentation, and the patience to let their own mistakes destroy them. The quarterly reports still run at Resilience Technologies. I trained my replacements well. But I made sure they understood something I'd learned the hard way: document everything, trust contracts more than promises, and never let anyone tell you your experience isn't valuable. Because 11 years of knowledge isn't just data in a spreadsheet. It's relationships, context, institutional memory, and expertise that can't be downloaded or transferred in an afternoon. They tried to steal it. I made them pay for it. And I made sure no one else would lose what I almost did. That's not revenge. That's justice.